podcast. Your host, Dr. Kelly Ray, is a renowned mindset coach and counselor, often referred to as the inner critic tamer. With a passion for guiding individuals through life's challenges, she specializes in personal growth and emotional healing. In each episode, Dr. Kelly Ray shares invaluable insights, practical strategies, and relatable stories designed to inspire you to take that first step toward positive change. So, grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and get ready to dive deep into meaningful conversations that empower you on your journey. Let's welcome Dr. Kelly Ray.
Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Getting Through the Week. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Ray, and as always, I am so glad that you're here spending time with me today. I want to start this week's episode with a question that I've been sitting a lot with lately. Who are you becoming? Not who were you, not who have you always been, not even who do you want to become, but who are you becoming right now? Because I think there comes a point in healing where the questions begin to change. For years, many of us focus on what needs fixing, what needs improving, what needs healing, what needs changing. We're trying to understand our wounds, understand our patterns, understand why we do the things we do. And that's really important work. And eventually something interesting happens. You begin noticing that the old version of you doesn't quite fit the same anymore. The things you used to tolerate feel heavier. The things you used to ignore become harder to ignore. The way you used to survive starts feeling exhausting. And at first, it can feel a little confusing. You may even wonder if something's wrong. Why am I suddenly bothered by things that never seemed to bother me before? Why am I feeling so emotional? Why am I so tired? Why do I suddenly want more peace, more balance, more space, more honesty? But what if nothing's wrong? What if the discomfort isn't a sign you're falling apart? What if it's a sign you're growing? Because lately, that's the question I've been asking myself. And generally, every time I go through an adult growth spurt. So wherever you are in the world, grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get this conversation started. Recently, I found myself feeling emotionally exhausted after a weekend that, on the surface, looked perfectly normal. I spent time with people I cared about, had meaningful conversations, shared meals, caught up with friends and family. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody upset me, nobody triggered me, nobody hurt my feelings, nothing went wrong. And yet, by the end of the weekend, I felt completely depleted. I found myself wanting to crawl into a cave, avoid people, and not talk to another living soul. At first, I couldn't figure out why. Because years ago, I would have simply pushed through it. I would have told myself, you're fine, suck it up, keep going, there's nothing wrong. I would have explained away everything I was feeling. I would have focused on everyone else's needs before considering my own. Something had changed. This time, I noticed it. I noticed the tension in my body. I noticed the exhaustion. I noticed the irritation. I noticed the part of me that felt like I was giving more energy than I had available to give. And what struck me wasn't the discomfort. It was the awareness. Because there was a time in my life when I wouldn't have noticed any of it until months later. I would have kept saying yes, kept showing up, kept listening, kept caring, and then eventually wondering why I felt resentful, exhausted, overwhelmed, or disconnected from myself. But now the discomfort shows up sooner. Not because I'm becoming less capable, not because I'm becoming selfish, but because I'm becoming more aware. And honestly, I think this is one of the strangest parts of healing. The things that once felt normal no longer feel normal. Things you once tolerated begin feeling heavy. The things you once ignored become impossible to ignore. And at first, that can feel uncomfortable. Because your old identity often wants to convince you that nothing has changed. But your body knows. Your nervous system knows. Your heart knows something is different. And maybe that's not a problem. Maybe that's growth. One of the things nobody really talks about in healing is how uncomfortable growth can feel when your identity starts changing. Because for a long time, I knew exactly who I was. I was dependable, reliable, the one people could count on, the one who showed up, the one who listened, the one who carried things, the one who made it work. And honestly, there was a lot of pride wrapped up in that identity. But lately I've noticed something. The things I once considered strengths sometimes feel different now. Not wrong, just different. For example, recently I found myself looking at my calendar and feeling resistance before the weekend even started. I had plans with a friend, plans with my brother, plans with another friend. None of them were bad plans. None of them were obligations. These were people generally who I care about. And yet something inside me was quietly saying, this feels like a lot. Years ago, I wouldn't have even noticed that voice. Or if I did, I would have immediately explained it away. They need support. It'll be fine. It's only a few hours. Don't be selfish. Just push through. But this time I heard it. The strange part wasn't hearing it. The strange part was realizing that voice might have been right. What struck me wasn't that I ended up exhausted. What struck me was the part of me knew I would. I felt it before the weekend even started. I simply didn't trust the signal enough yet. especially when it's those people that are absolutely the closest to you. Maybe growth isn't learning to hear yourself. Maybe growth is learning to trust yourself when you do. What's interesting is I've seen this pattern show up over and over and over again in the people I work with. They often come to me saying they don't trust themselves. But when they start unpacking things, we usually discover they do trust themselves. They noticed the red flags. They felt the exhaustion. They sensed the relationship wasn't healthy. They knew the boundary was needed. They felt the resentment building. They heard the signal. The problem wasn't hearing themselves. The problem was they learned not to believe themselves. And honestly, that's a very different thing. Because once you realize you've been hearing yourself all along, the work becomes less about finding your voice and more about learning to trust it. I think one of the reasons so many people struggle to trust themselves is because there was a time when trusting themselves didn't feel practical. Maybe you knew you were tired, but the responsibilities still had to be handled. Maybe you knew you were overwhelmed, but there wasn't anyone available to help. Maybe you knew something felt wrong, but speaking up didn't change the situation. So you learn to keep going. You learn to push through. You learn to override your own signals. And honestly, that can be an incredibly effective survival strategy. For many years, I became very good at it. Masterful, actually. I could keep going when I was exhausted. I could show up when I had nothing left in the tank. I could put other people's needs ahead of my own without even thinking twice about it. And for a long time, I viewed that as strength. But lately I've begun seeing something differently. Just because I can override myself doesn't mean I should. Just because I can carry more doesn't mean it's healthy to keep carrying more. And just because I've survived that way doesn't mean I want to continue living that way. Those of you who have been listening to some of my episodes have heard me talk about a part of myself named Trudy. Trudy learned very early that if something needed to be handled, she better handle it. If something fell apart, she better figure it out. If support wasn't available, she'd better keep going. And honestly, she became really good at it. But what I've come to understand is that Trudy isn't learning how to hear herself. She's learning how to trust that someone else is listening now. That someone is me, adult Kelly Ray. And maybe that's true for many of us. Maybe healing isn't just learning to trust ourselves. Maybe it's learning to become someone your younger selves can trust too. One of the things I've come to appreciate most about the work I do, helping people understand parts of themselves they've spent years fighting with. Sometimes it's an inner critic. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's perfectionism. Sometimes it's people pleasing. Sometimes it's a part that seems determined to keep them stuck. But when we slow down long enough to get curious, we often discover those parts aren't trying to ruin their lives. They're trying to protect them. The challenge isn't silencing those parts. The challenge is learning how to understand what they're actually trying to communicate. And once people begin understanding the language underneath the behavior, everything starts to look different. I think one of the most confusing parts of growth is that it doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels emotional. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels exhausting. Sometimes it feels like you're moving backward when you're actually moving forward. Lately, I've noticed things affecting me differently than they used to. Not because life has become harder, but because I'm paying attention in ways I hadn't done before. I notice now when my calendar feels too full. I notice when I'm giving more energy than I have available. I notice when my body's asking for rest. I notice when I'm feeling stretched too thin. Years ago, I would have ignored all of those signals. Now I hear them. The challenge is learning to trust them. Because the old version of me believed pushing through was the answer. The version of me that's emerging is beginning to understand that honoring myself is equally important. And honestly, that's uncomfortable sometimes. Because when you've spent decades operating one way, choosing something different can feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar doesn't automatically mean wrong. Sometimes unfamiliar is simply evidence that you're growing. Sometimes the discomfort is a sign that something is broken. It's not a sign that something's broken, sorry. Sometimes it's a sign that something is changing. We tend to usually fall back on our default survival setting of like, oh, something's wrong with me, I'm failing, I'm not doing it right, I'm not growing. When in fact that may not be any of that at all. So today I want to leave you with a question. Who are you becoming? Not who have you been. Not who do other people expect you to be. Not who have you become to survive. But who are you becoming now? Because maybe the goal isn't to become someone entirely different. Maybe the goal is to become more honest with yourself, more connected to yourself, more willing to listen when your body speaks, more willing to trust what you know, more willing to honor your own capacity, more willing to include yourself in the care you so freely give to everyone else. And honestly, it's where I find myself these days. Not becoming someone who cares less, not becoming someone who shows up less, not becoming someone who loves less, but becoming someone who includes herself in the equation. And honestly, that's something I hope for the people I work with too. Not that they become completely different people. Not that they eliminate every fear, every doubt, or every old pattern. But that they begin trusting themselves enough to honor what they're feeling. To listen to what their body is telling them. To understand the parts of themselves they've spent years judging. And to realize that healing isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more fully themselves. As I sat reflecting on this past weekend, what struck me wasn't that I ended up exhausted. What struck me was the part of me that knew I would be. I felt it before the weekend even started. I noticed it when I looked at my calendar. I noticed when I scheduled one more thing, and then one more thing after that. There was even a part of me that said, might as well just get it all done in one weekend. The signals were there. I simply wasn't fully trusting them. And maybe that's what this season of life is teaching me. Not how to hear myself, but how to trust myself. So this week, I want to encourage you to pay attention to your own signals. Not the loud, dramatic ones, the quiet ones. The whispers. The subtle nudges. The moments where something inside you says, this feels like a lot. I need rest. I need space. Oh, I need a boundary. I need support. Because maybe that voice isn't getting in your way. Maybe it's trying to guide you. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Getting Through the Week. Until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and remember, you may be becoming someone your younger self has been waiting for all along. Until next week, I send you so much
Thank you for
love.
joining us for another episode of the Getting Through the Week podcast with Dr. Kelly Ray. If you're looking to connect with her or schedule an appointment, here's how you can reach her. Follow her on Instagram at Ask Dr. Kelly Ray. Check out her Facebook page at Dr. Kelly Ray B. Find her on TikTok at Dr. Kelly Ray. Visit her website at drkellyray.com. Or send her an email at drkellyray@gmail.com. Until next week, Dr. Kelly Ray sends you so much love.